God bless America. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Welcome. You're watching The Big Question. I'm Tamanna Inamdar. We have some picture of what Trump 2.0 will look like. Just hours after being sworn in as the 47th President of the United States for an unprecedented second term, because it wasn't consecutive, Donald Trump wasted no time in shaking the foundations of global politics. And I'm not even exaggerating. In fact, his inaugural speech saw him doubling down on Make America Great Again, that promise. And he also promised that his presidency will usher in the golden age of America. Within 6 hours of taking over the Oval Office, Trump has signed a flurry of executive orders making his agenda clear. Donald Trump signed an order for the United States to exit the World Health Organization, insisting Washington was unfairly paying more than China to fund the health body. He also pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, repeating an action he took during his first term. Restrictions have been ramped up on immigration and asylum seekers. He has called illegal immigrants illegal aliens. They have made clarifications that there are only 2 genders now in the United States. The new US president has declared a national emergency at the southern border with Mexico. He's cracked down on birthright citizenships, a law that has been in place for nearly 150 years. Will have large-scale implications and may end up in court. With this new order and sets of new orders, they have set in motion a move to end the automatic citizenship of children born in the US to non-citizen parents. Along expected lines, President Donald Trump has signed orders dropping criminal charges against those booked in the Jan 6 riots. As for China, Trump has signed an executive order delaying the ban on TikTok by at least 75 days. The TikTok top brass was also present at the inauguration. Trump's target of neighbors has already begun. He says the Gulf of Mexico will be renamed the Gulf of America. He's also vowed to take back the crucial Panama Canal, accusing China of operating the strategic waterway and criticizing its transfer to Panama in 1999. In fact, this is just one set of it. I have to come to tariffs as well. As for tariffs, President Donald Trump has said his administration will impose 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada on February 1st for failing to stop illegal immigration and narcotics into the United States. He's reiterated his threat towards BRICS nations, stating that BRICS countries would face a 100% tariff on trade with the US if they continue their de-dollarization efforts. Now, so much to pack in, and more of it coming in. He's overturned 78 orders of Joe Biden. He has, removed all necessary rules on DEI, that's diversity, inclusion. So there's so much more that Trump has done, and this is just the first 6 hours, which is why we're asking today, what does Trump's golden age mean for the world? Yes, it will mean a lot for America, but let's look at this from a global perspective, considering that there is so much action which has already taken place. Now, let's get to our guests on this. To speak on this, I'm joined first with Sadanand Dhume, who is speaking on this issue. We'll also be speaking in a bit with Jim Rogers. Sadanand, great to speak with you after a while and on a good day. We've caught you in Tokyo, so that's fantastic. Just on what you've made on the first set of orders, I think nothing that would be a huge surprise because you've talked about all of this, but nothing really on tariffs.
I said they will probably, they will get to tariffs. We're still sort of, we're still seeing this is still, it's not even early days. It's literally the first day. I would say that most striking thing is the contrast between Trump 2025 and Trump 2017. He has come in much better prepared. He has people who have a very clear idea of where to take this. They have been preparing for this over the last 4 years out of power, and they've moved very swiftly and very decisively, on a range of issues, whether it's, DEI, whether it's immigration, and so on. So what you're going to see is, I think, a very, very different Trump from what we saw in the first term, where, to a large extent, he was stymied. He wasn't he wasn't sure how Washington worked. He had many people who in his cabinet who had views that were different from him. There were many people in the bureaucracy, for example, who were able to push back. And I think a lot of the media and so on was also, very united and quite hostile toward him. I think he faces a very different environment now. He's come in having won the popular vote as well as the electoral college. He's much better prepared. He has a much more competent team, and we're going to see some very far-reaching changes.
Okay. You think Trump 2.0 will be much better organized compared to Trump 1.0? Let's talk a bit about the composition of his team. We know Elon Musk is there, and we saw Elon Musk, doing that little jig, dancing up to the stage. We know Mark Rubio is the Secretary of State. I think the Defense Secretary also is now becoming fairly clear. What do you think of the team, Sadanand?
So that it's a team that is, if you look at it from the sort of foreign, I mean, you can look at it in many different ways, but if you look at it from a national security or foreign policy perspective, and we can get to what this means for India. If you look at Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, basically he's putting together a team that I believe is going to challenge some of the mainstays of American foreign policy and American thinking since 1945 and certainly since 1991 and the end of the Cold War. I think what you're looking at is a U.S. approach to the world, which is going to be much more, you see this word that's overused, transactional, but I think that's certainly going to be true. I don't think transactionalism is necessarily always a bad thing, but it's basically the United States that turns around and asks countries at which it works with, what are you going to do for me? As opposed to the U.S. as this, largely benign actor on the global stage that doesn't really ask these questions and was willing to take the long view. It's going to be much more focused than before on that question: what's in it for the United States? It seems like there's going to be much less reliance, if you compare it with the Biden administration, there's going to be less reliance on traditional allies and partners, right? The Western European nations. And you saw that even in this inauguration, right? You had, Dr. Jaishankar sitting in the front row. You had the Quad partners over there too, the foreign ministers of Japan and Australia. And you didn't really see, as you would normally have expected, you didn't really see the Germans, the Brits, the French, the sort of, the people who are sort of traditionally closest to the United States in this post-war order. So I'm not saying that these alliances simply go away, but I do think that what you're looking at here in some ways is a departure and is a willingness to look at foreign policy and national security as well as issues like trade with fresh eyes.
I'm just wondering how seriously should we take, and of course there's no reason not to, because he's even in the first lot done everything he said he would. How seriously should we take the threats against Mexico and Canada and what he's saying on BRICS specifically?
Well, look, I mean, with Trump, some of this is always, you have to sort of parse things, keeping in mind that sometimes stuff that he says is just a part of a negotiating tactic. So, he'll sometimes, enter with a bold sweeping statement and, end up somewhere with a compromise. So, I mean, I would be very surprised if the US and Canada end up, for example, in a full-blown trade war. I think what's much more likely is that Trump is going to use the threat of tariffs to extract concessions on a range of issues, and I think including, most importantly, on border security, which has really been the number one issue for his supporters. I mean, Donald Trump would not be president today if there wasn't a deep-rooted anxiety in the American electorate about Biden having completely lost control of the borders and literally allowing millions of people to stream into the United States. So I think Trump recognizes that this is the number one priority of his voters. I think he probably recognizes that he didn't do as much as he could have in his first term. And, so this is all part of this larger tapestry that's going to be woven. And there are going to be elements that are, related to trade. There are going to be elements related to border security. There are going to be elements related to, an American assertion of its preeminence in places like Panama, perhaps the acquisition of Greenland. You're just going to see that all of these sort of, come together. And I don't think that we should be looking at the question of tariffs or the threat of tariffs, whether it's against Canada and Mexico or whether it's against China and the BRICS in isolation. I mean, on the BRICS question, as you're aware, and as many of your viewers are aware, I mean, the de-dollarization is something that's essentially being pushed by China and Russia. I don't think it's made tremendous progress. And India, for instance, has really not been interested in it. So I think it's sort of, more a kind of signaling device in that particular case, because I don't think de-dollarization was going anywhere in any case.
So from an Indian perspective, Sadanand, just trying to understand this. From an Indian perspective, what is Trump 2.0 looking like for us? Will he go harder on China than India? Because that's been the calculation so far. And seeing what his narrative is, he wants to meet Xi Jinping, he wants to pardon TikTok. Can we really be sure of that?
Well, it's a great question, Tamanna, and I wish I had a clear answer. I don't. Right. I mean, if you one way of looking at it is that if you look at his campaign rhetoric and and I'm sure you've watched many of his campaign speeches, as have I. If you look at the campaign rhetoric, it was quite tough on China. If you look at the people he has chosen, right, people like Rubio, people like Mike Waltz, these are people who are have very strong credentials as China hawks, in the Defense Department too. So you have a group of people around who certainly recognize that China is the preeminent rival of the United States. It is the first time the U.S. has seen a near-peer competitor of this size and of this technological sophistication. I would argue that in many ways China presents a much greater competitive threat to the United States than the Soviet Union ever did. So you do have people who have that point of view. Those are the people who are in the administration. But beyond that, I think there's a broad bipartisan consensus in Washington on the China threat. So you have that on one side. On the other side, you have Trump's predilection for deal making. And I think the most vivid example of this is what's going on with TikTok, right? I mean, there's a law. It's a law that's been upheld by the Supreme Court that TikTok has to be, sell to a U.S. buyer or basically become unavailable in the U.S. And you see Trump step in and ask for extra time. So I think that many people in Asian capitals, whether they say it or not, but including in New Delhi, are going to be, watching this very carefully and with a certain degree of trepidation, right? What their worry would be that what if Trump decides that he's going to cut a deal with China, some kind of deal that, that works out for the U.S., that works out for China, and so that to me it's a very big question mark. We're seeing media reports that Trump plans to visit China in the first 100 days. So just how hawkish he ends up being, if I had to bet, I do think he's going to end up being hawkish, but I think that it's not 100% certainty. It's a likelihood.
Anyone who tries to predict what Trump is going to do in the next 4 years, that will be fairly brave, and I'm perhaps a bit foolhardy. But thank you so much, Sadanand, for your time. Sadanand Dhume, Senior Fellow, American Enterprise Institute, there on what Trump 2.0 could mean for the world and, of course, for India. We've seen a glimpse of it so far. And here we've talked about the geopolitics of it. Remember, he's also said that Putin has spoken to him. Zelensky wants to end the war. There's a ceasefire in Gaza. Can he actually bring world peace? On the other side of this very short break, I talked to some of the biggest investors who tell us what Trump 2.0 means for various asset classes and for the investing community. Hear from Ramesh Damani and Samir Arora after this break.